She had always thought her life was ordinary, the kind of life that unfolded quietly, without surprises. But that evening, everything shifted in ways she couldn't have imagined. She noticed it first when Daniel, her husband, came home later than usual. His suit looked rumpled, his tie slightly loose, and there was a tension in his shoulders that made her stomach tighten. He rarely let work follow him home, yet tonight, it seemed unavoidable. "I had a long day," Daniel said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of something unsaid. He set his briefcase down by the door and leaned against the wall. She studied him, curious and slightly worried. "You'll understand soon," he added, offering a small smile, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, maybe even frustration. She tilted her head, her heart a little heavy with unease. "Understand what?" she asked, but he only shook his head, a subtle gesture that made her sense there was more going on than he wanted to share. Later, after dinner, Daniel sank into the couch, scrolling through his phone in silence. She sat across from him, her curiosity growing, until a notification flashed briefly on his screen: "Meeting postponed, urgent matter handled." The sender's name caught her attention immediately: Martin, Daniel's coworker. She had met Martin a few times, and every time, she noticed the calm authority in him. He didn't raise his voice or demand attention, yet when he spoke, people listened. Even Daniel seemed to hang on his words without question. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice soft, trying not to sound pushy. Daniel paused, rubbing his face with a hand as if trying to erase the tension. "It's complicated," he admitted. "There's a situation at work." "Martin, he handled it differently than I expected." "Differently how?" she pressed gently, leaning forward. "He stepped in," Daniel said slowly, his voice almost hesitant. "And, honestly, his calm way of speaking, it made things fall into place better than I ever could have." She frowned, unsure what to make of it. She had always admired Daniel for his strength, his steady presence, his ability to navigate challenges. But tonight, he seemed vulnerable, dependent even on Martin's guidance. It wasn't weakness. It was respect, awe, and something more subtle that made her heart tighten. "Do you trust him?" she asked softly, her mind racing. "Yes," Daniel said, looking into her eyes, earnest and unwavering. "But trust isn't the same as understanding. Martin, he sees things I can't. He knows how to handle situations in a way I don't always see at first." She nodded slowly. She understood admiration, but this was something different. There was a gravity in Daniel's words, a kind of silent weight that she couldn't ignore. And yet, she didn't sense any threat, only a shift in the balance, a realization that some voices carry more weight than others, even over someone as confident and capable as Daniel. As the night wore on, she noticed how often Daniel's thoughts drifted back to Martin. Even in casual conversation, his words hinted at a reliance she hadn't seen before. It wasn't alarming exactly, but it was strange, almost magnetic. She thought about how Martin's calm voice could guide, soothe, and influence situations without drama, without urgency. And she realized she had never considered how powerful such quiet authority could be. She found herself lying awake later, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the day's events. Daniel's subtle shift, his reliance on Martin, the way he seemed lighter after interacting with him, it was all unfamiliar. It made her think about the weight of words, the unseen force that certain people could hold, simply by speaking in a calm, deliberate way. She felt a strange mix of curiosity and unease, a protective instinct she hadn't felt in years. Her thoughts kept circling back to Daniel and Martin. She remembered the brief messages, the hurried tones, the way Daniel's tension melted after a phone call from Martin. It was a quiet, invisible influence, but powerful nonetheless. She realized that sometimes, strength isn't loud or obvious, it's soft, steady, and deliberate. And Daniel had experienced it tonight, firsthand. By midnight, she made a silent promise to herself. She would understand this dynamic, the unspoken influence Martin held, and the way Daniel seemed to respond. She wouldn't let her curiosity become worry, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that her life, the ordinary life she thought she knew, was beginning to shift. When the clock ticked past 12, she finally drifted into a light sleep, yet the sense of change lingered. The next morning promised to be different: Daniel leaving for work, the messages from Martin, the subtle pull of someone's calm voice shaping events she hadn't even seen coming. She knew that soon, her understanding of strength, trust, and influence would be tested in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The ordinary life she had counted on now felt fragile, like a thread stretched thin, waiting to be pulled. And deep inside, she felt a stirring, a combination of excitement and apprehension, as she realized that the world she knew was about to expand in unexpected ways. By dawn, the quiet house held a tense stillness. She listened to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, and the ticking of the clock. Every sound reminded her that life was moving forward, carrying Daniel with it, carrying Martin's unseen influence, and carrying her curiosity into an unknown future. And though she didn't yet know how or why, she felt certain that tonight's events were only the beginning. Something had shifted, subtly, profoundly, and the calm, measured voice of Daniel's coworker had already started to carry more weight than she could have imagined. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, letting the quiet wrap around her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she had to be ready for it. Ready to witness the change. Ready to understand the power of a voice that could alter even the strongest hearts. And then the phone buzzed on the nightstand, cutting through the stillness. A message from Martin appeared briefly on Daniel's phone screen before he woke. It was simple, precise, yet it carried the weight of the entire evening. Everything is under control, but be ready. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to expect next, but she knew one thing clearly: nothing would be the same again. The morning sun spilled through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold. She watched Daniel get ready for work, his movements mechanical, distracted, as if part of his mind was still entangled in yesterday's events. He kissed her forehead quickly before leaving, and she felt the usual warmth of his touch replaced by a subtle distance. She tried to shake off the feeling as she went about her morning routine. Coffee in hand, she glanced at Daniel's phone, which he had left charging on the counter. The message from Martin still lingered in her mind: everything is under control, but be ready. It was simple, calm, but there was an authority in those words that made her pulse quicken. By 9:30, the house was quiet except for the ticking clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. She couldn't stop thinking about Martin, about his influence over Daniel. She had always trusted her husband, yet a strange unease settled in her chest. Not distrust, something subtler, more complicated. She was curious. She needed to understand. Daniel called around 10. His voice was steady, but she could hear the faint tension beneath it. "Morning," he said. "It's going to be a busy day. Things at work are complicated." She pressed for more details. "Is it about Martin?" There was a pause. "In a way. Martin handled a situation yesterday that could have gone badly. He knows how to manage these things. Better than I ever could." She felt a knot in her stomach. She understood admiration, but there was a vulnerability in Daniel's tone she hadn't noticed before. He sounded almost reliant. And that tiny word, better, carried a weight she hadn't expected. By noon, she couldn't sit still. She found herself wandering the streets near her apartment, thinking about Martin's calm authority, the way Daniel had leaned on him. It was fascinating and unsettling. She remembered the first time she met him. His presence had been quiet, almost unassuming, yet everyone had listened when he spoke. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to demand attention. People followed because he made them feel safe, guided, understood. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Daniel. "Lunch later? Need to talk." She felt her heart skip. They had rarely paused during their day for personal conversations. Something significant was brewing, and she couldn't ignore it. When Daniel returned home, his expression was exhausted, but there was a clarity in his eyes she hadn't seen the night before. They sat in the living room, the quiet hum of the city outside filling the pauses between their words. "I need to tell you something," Daniel began, voice low, steady, but tinged with emotion. "Martin, he helped me handle something big today. And honestly, I don't think I would have managed it alone." She reached for his hand, feeling the familiar warmth, but also the vulnerability he was revealing. "It's okay," she said softly. "I just want to understand." He took a deep breath. "It's not just about work. It's about the way he influences people. His calm voice, the way he speaks, it changes things. It changes how I think, how I act. And I never realized how much I needed that until now. She listened, absorbing every word, realizing that this wasn't about rivalry, or jealousy, or mistrust. It was about connection, respect, and a subtle power that came from understanding, from composure, from presence. Martin's voice carried authority without aggression. It carried weight without force. And Daniel had experienced that firsthand. Her mind wandered again, imagining Daniel in meetings, Martin's calm tone steering conversations, guiding decisions, lifting burdens she couldn't see. She understood now. Influence didn't need to be loud. Sometimes, it was quiet, steady, unshakable. And the weight it carried could change even the strongest person's day or their heart. Dinner that evening was quiet. They ate slowly, both lost in thought. She kept glancing at Daniel, wondering how much of his admiration for Martin would shift their lives. She didn't fear it. She felt curiosity, intrigue, a desire to witness what happened next. After the dishes were done, they settled on the couch. Daniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then put it down without a word. But she noticed his eyes lingered, a mix of respect, tension, and anticipation. It was as if Martin's calm voice had woven an invisible thread through the day, tugging at Daniel in ways she couldn't yet measure. Later, as she lay in bed, she thought about influence, trust, and the quiet power some people wield without even trying. She realized her life was no longer as predictable as she had believed. Something had shifted, gently, subtly, but unmistakably. The ordinary threads of her life were being pulled in a new direction, toward a connection, a dynamic she hadn't expected but couldn't ignore. And as she drifted to sleep, she felt the pull of anticipation, of curiosity, of a day to come that promised change. She didn't know exactly how or why, but she knew one thing clearly: the calm voice she hadn't fully understood yesterday had already begun to shape the days ahead. Tomorrow would bring answers, or at least glimpses. And she couldn't wait to see what would unfold. The next morning, the sun rose soft and golden, but she woke feeling a tension she couldn't shake. It wasn't fear, exactly, just the sense that something important was about to happen. She could still hear Martin's calm voice in her mind, the quiet authority Daniel had described. It was strange, almost magnetic, and she realized she had never paid attention to how much influence words alone could hold. Daniel left for work earlier than usual. He kissed her cheek lightly, his expression serious yet distant. "I might be late," he said. "It's complicated today." She nodded, trying to hide the flutter of worry that rose inside her. She had learned to trust him implicitly, yet Martin's presence had already shifted the rhythm of their lives. She busied herself with chores, but her mind wandered. She thought about the previous day, the subtle weight of Martin's voice over Daniel, the way her husband had seemed both relieved and mesmerized by his coworker's calm authority. By mid-morning, she could no longer sit still. She walked to the nearby cafe, a habit she hadn't had in months, needing the fresh air, needing to think. Every time her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, her heart skipped. But there was no text yet. She imagined Daniel in the office, facing challenges, relying on Martin's guidance, his calm words shaping decisions, easing tension, giving clarity where there had been chaos. Around noon, her phone finally vibrated. It was a brief message from Daniel: "Call me when you have a moment." Her heart raced. She found a quiet corner of the cafe, dialed his number, and waited. The line connected, and she heard his voice, low and steady. "Hi," he said. There was a pause, a weight behind the simple greeting. I wanted to explain more about yesterday. About Martin. About how he handled things." She encouraged him softly. "I'm listening." Daniel's words were deliberate, careful, but filled with a subtle emotion. "It's not just about work. Martin, he has this calm, almost unshakable presence. He can guide people without telling them what to do. He speaks, and things change. I felt it yesterday. I realized how much I needed that voice. How much I needed someone who could see what I couldn't." She could hear the admiration, but also the vulnerability, the unspoken relief in his tone. She didn't feel jealousy, she felt curiosity, fascination, and something protective, a desire to understand this dynamic fully. "Does it scare you?" she asked quietly. "No," he admitted. "Not fear. Respect. Relief. I don't think I've ever realized how much a calm voice can carry weight. How it can shift things, even inside me." She smiled softly. She understood now. Martin's influence wasn't about control or manipulation. It was about presence, clarity, and quiet authority, the kind that could guide even the most confident person when chaos threatened. After the call, she spent the afternoon walking through the park, thinking about influence, trust, and subtle power. She realized how often life is shaped not by loud declarations or dramatic gestures, but by quiet, measured words that carry weight beyond the obvious. Daniel had experienced it, and she had seen the effect on him. She wondered how much more his life would change, and how much she herself would be affected. When Daniel came home that evening, his expression was different. There was a calmness, a lightness, as if something invisible had lifted a burden from his shoulders. He hugged her longer than usual, and she could feel a quiet shift in him, a subtle strength she hadn't noticed before. "I think I'm beginning to understand," he said, settling beside her. "Martin, he doesn't just solve problems. He changes perspectives. He helps people see solutions they couldn't see before. And sometimes, that's what matters most." She nodded, feeling a connection not just to Daniel, but to the invisible influence of a calm voice that had entered their lives. It was strange, almost magical, how a single person could leave such an imprint, not through power, but through presence. The night deepened, the quiet of their home wrapping around them. She felt a gentle excitement, the kind that comes when life begins to shift in unexpected directions. She didn't yet know where this path would lead, but she sensed that the days ahead would bring insights, emotions, and challenges she hadn't anticipated. And as she drifted into sleep, she realized one thing clearly: the calm voice that had carried so much weight yesterday was only the beginning. Its ripple would touch their lives again, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps sooner, shaping choices, feelings, and hearts in ways neither of them could yet predict. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was simple, quiet, and insistent: change had arrived. And she was ready to face it. The following morning, she woke to the soft hum of the city, sunlight filtering gently through the curtains. She felt a quiet anticipation in her chest, a subtle pull toward something she couldn't yet define. Daniel had left for work earlier than usual, as if the day demanded more of him. But she sensed the shift in his energy. The calmness he had carried home last night had deepened into something steady, almost serene. She made her way to the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of tea, and found her thoughts drifting again to Martin. His presence had entered their lives subtly, almost invisibly, yet it left a weighty imprint. She realized she was fascinated not by him personally, but by what his calm voice could do, the way it influenced, steadied, and reassured. Even Daniel, so strong and capable, had yielded to that quiet authority. Her phone buzzed at 11. A message from Daniel: "Lunch later? There's something I want to tell you." Her pulse quickened. This had become a pattern: small messages, subtle hints that carried more meaning than words could convey. She dressed quickly and decided to meet him at their favorite cafe, wondering what today might reveal. When she arrived, Daniel was already seated, his expression thoughtful but composed. He smiled when he saw her, but there was a seriousness behind his eyes that drew her in. "Hi," he said. "Thanks for coming." They ordered coffee, sitting in a quiet corner, the soft murmur of other patrons around them. He leaned back, fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "Yesterday, it made me realize something important," he began, his voice low and measured. Martin's calm approach, the way he handled things, it's more than guidance. It's perspective. He sees solutions that aren't obvious, and somehow, that perspective carries weight. She listened, captivated. There was no jealousy, no resentment, only awe and curiosity in his words. "And how does that make you feel?" she asked gently. Daniel paused, choosing each word with care. "It's strange. Relief, admiration, and maybe even a little vulnerability. I didn't realize I could feel so unsteady and supported at the same time." Martin's voice: "It anchors me. helps me think clearly when everything feels tangled." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. She understood now the calm authority Martin possessed was a kind of power that was quiet yet undeniable. It wasn't about dominance or control. It was about clarity, influence, and guidance. And Daniel had experienced it firsthand. As they left the cafe, walking through the park, she noticed the change in him. His posture was lighter, his steps more deliberate, and the tension she had seen in his shoulders the night before was gone. The invisible influence of Martin's calm voice had done something remarkable. It had lifted a burden she hadn't even realized he carried. Back home, she found herself thinking about influence in new ways. She understood that life was often shaped not by dramatic gestures, but by subtle forces, the steady guidance of a calm voice, a small nudge in the right direction, a perspective that changed everything. She realized that Martin's presence in their lives, while indirect, was significant. That evening, Daniel returned home carrying a folder of documents, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He dropped his briefcase by the door and pulled her into a gentle hug. "I think I understand more now," he said. "Not just about work, but about how people affect us. Even someone like Martin, without trying, can shift the way we think, the way we feel." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. This was new territory for both of them, a delicate dance between influence, trust, and admiration. She realized that life wasn't about avoiding change, but about embracing it, learning from it, and letting it guide them in unexpected ways. As night fell, they sat together in silence, the quiet of their home wrapping around them. Her thoughts drifted to the future, how tomorrow might bring new challenges, new revelations, and perhaps more moments shaped by Martin's calm presence. She didn't fear it. She felt anticipation, curiosity, and a gentle excitement at the unknown. And then Daniel spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, sometimes the smallest voice can carry the heaviest weight." She leaned her head on his shoulder, understanding perfectly. The calm voice she hadn't realized yesterday had already begun to shape not only Daniel's world, but theirs together. And she knew, deep down, that tomorrow, the influence of that voice would touch their lives again, perhaps in ways they could never predict. As she drifted into sleep, her last thought was simple and clear. Life was changing, quietly, steadily, and beautifully. And she was ready to see where it would lead. But just as the house settled into stillness, her phone buzzed once more. A message from Martin appeared on Daniel's phone. "We'll need to act tomorrow. Be ready." Her heart skipped a beat. Something significant was coming, something that would test not just Daniel, but their understanding of influence, trust, and connection. The calm voice that had already shifted so much in their lives was about to leave its mark again. And she realized with a quiet certainty everything was about to change. The morning arrived with an unusual stillness. Sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, but the air carried a subtle tension, the kind that prickled at the skin. She watched Daniel move around the apartment, precise and focused, yet there was a quiet anticipation in his steps, a rhythm she had never seen before. "Are you ready?" she asked, standing in the doorway as he zipped up his jacket. Daniel smiled, a mixture of nerves and calm in his eyes. "As ready as I can be," he said. "Martin," he called this morning. "There's something important happening at work. And I think I need to trust his judgment completely." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent days observing, thinking, understanding the invisible force that Martin's calm presence carried. Now, it was time to see it in action, to witness the quiet authority that had subtly shaped Daniel's thoughts, his confidence, and even their lives. At the office, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Daniel moved through the space with a steadiness she hadn't seen before, his focus sharpened, his mind clear. Martin's calm voice guided him, not in commands, but in subtle reminders, soft encouragements, and a clarity that made everything fall into place. She watched from a distance, hidden yet present, her heart swelling with awe. "Focus on the solutions, not the obstacles," Martin said quietly to Daniel. His voice was low, even, but it carried an authority that made everyone in the room pause, consider, and adjust. Daniel absorbed it, nodded, and executed decisions with a confidence that seemed almost new. She realized then how powerful such influence could be. It wasn't loud, flashy, or demanding. It was quiet, thoughtful, deliberate. And it had the ability to lift, guide, and transform even the most capable person. Daniel, whom she had always admired for his strength, now seemed strengthened in ways she hadn't imagined possible by someone else's calm, steady presence. By late afternoon, the tension had eased. The work that had seemed overwhelming in the morning had been resolved with precision, thanks to Martin's guidance. Daniel returned home, his steps lighter, his posture relaxed, his eyes carrying a sparkle she hadn't seen in days. "You did it," she said softly, hugging him tightly. "Everything looks lighter somehow." Daniel smiled, relief and gratitude mingling in his expression. "It feels lighter," he admitted. "Not because it was easy, but because I wasn't carrying it alone. Martin," his calm voice guided me, helped me see solutions I couldn't see myself. And I realized something important. Influence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, gentle, and powerful all at once." She nodded, understanding fully now. She had spent days watching, thinking, and learning, and she had come to a quiet truth. Strength could come from collaboration, trust, and the subtle power of someone who speaks with clarity and calm. That evening, they sat together in their living room, the soft hum of the city outside a soothing backdrop. She rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, feeling the warmth and steadiness that had returned to him. "It's amazing," she whispered. "How someone can change so much just by being calm, by speaking with weight in their words." Daniel kissed her forehead gently. "It is," he agreed. "And I'm grateful. Not just for Martin, but for understanding that strength can come in many forms. Today taught me that. And it taught me to trust the quiet power around me, the voices that guide without shouting, the presence that steadies without force." She smiled, feeling a deep, quiet peace. Their world, once ordinary and predictable, had expanded. It had room now for influence, subtle guidance, admiration, and trust. And it was richer for it. As the night deepened, she realized that life's greatest changes often arrive quietly. The calm voice that had carried so much weight had reshaped their lives, their understanding of strength, and even their hearts. It had left a mark not through power, but through presence, and she knew they would carry its lessons forever. Before sleep claimed them, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "Some voices change everything." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, and they fell asleep together, hearts aligned, minds open, and lives forever shifted by the quiet, steady power of influence, trust, and understanding. The ordinary life they had known was gone, replaced by something subtle, profound, and deeply human. And she knew, with certainty, that this was only the beginning of a life enriched by the calm, guiding presence that had entered their world, and that nothing would ever feel quite ordinary again.